the idea is, so add support for merging external events into a custom prompt. I've been wanting a way to link external data into Prompt.custom in a way that triggers a re-render without needing to press a keystroke. In the current implementation, I need a way to fake a keystroke as a hacky workaround or build my own render loop from scratch. Ideally, what I wanted was an API where I could just pass in a stream of events and be able to trigger the action with the next state. I've been digging around in prompt for a while. I already knew that terminal read input was a queue. What I settled on was a type overload where there's the current implementation without the event doing the same thing, and a new type that adds the new events. This way, the queue can be a progressive enhancement on an already functioning user input-only prompt. The prompt isn't responsible for cleaning up the queue. This needs to be handled by the user. There's still a very small possibility of an event and a user input happening simultaneously. I don't think this is a concern. Queue needs to not fail, so the user is responsible outside of the prompt to handle these cases. Want to make an issue first? Let's take a look at the code. So the prompt races user input against events from the DQ, allowing background events to trigger re-renders without waiting for a key press. What is this receive thing? Is that already in my custom prompt interface? All right, well, let's open this diff this way. So no, receive is a new thing. So I guess, Lloyd, correct me if I'm wrong, but receive would be the thing that gets user events and decides like what action to take. Let's keep scrolling through the code. Optionally, an external events DQ can be provided as the third argument. When present, the render loop will race user input against the background. An event is received from the DQ. The receive handler is called instead of process. Not sure I like having a separate receive handler. I think what would be nicer is for process, the type of process. I don't know if this is possible because obviously I haven't spent any time with this PR, but I think what would be a nicer model is for process. If you pass an external queue in, I think it would be nicer for process to be overloaded with like a union of the user input versus the events that you've like passed in here. Because like having another handler that's basically doing the same thing as process is kind of annoying.
Also not sure if I like too much the fact that you are giving a queue. Maybe it could be like something like that you give a stream, so that way that's acquired when the input is started and is closed when the custom prompt is ended, maybe.
So we're racing, taking from the input versus taking from the events. So this is user input versus events.
And then calls a different action based on the kind, which is basically...
I separated them so that if an existing Prompt.custom implementation wants to add external events afterwards, the process callback doesn't need to change. Yeah, I still don't think that this is the right choice. I think that merging into process, keeping the interface simple, I think outweighs that convenience. I don't like having a separate receive handler because then you're separating two concerns that are doing the same thing. Like this and this then are basically doing the exact same thing. It doesn't feel good. Like I think it makes more sense to force the user to update this later uh, if they decide they want external events coming in. I think that a queue or something similar is required, Mattia, just because of the way that the render loop is implemented. It's as a while loop that
Yeah,
processes
okay.
like each event. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Again, I haven't spent a lot of time with this PR. Um, yeah, I think that this logic needs to be merged into. I think that the idea of this PR is fine. Um, the other thing I would do. So let's do two things. I'm not sure an overload is required anymore if you're. So let's make some comments. Um, I would suggest. I would prefer avoiding a separate receive handler and instead merge the event types into the process input and force the user to handle that logic there. Otherwise, we have two separate handlers that are the same thing. The other thing about this is, I mean, it's fine. It's not ideal, but it's fine. Is that because events is the last parameter here, uh process, where is it? Like if you merge the receive handler into process and events becomes the last argument. Okay. Um if events is the last argument here, the A type that you're concerned with here won't it, like this here will just be unknown until you pass the events in as the last argument. So like the the overload would instead have to be like initial state queue handlers. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Because other like you
Yeah.
want this type to be fixed before you start specifying your handlers. Otherwise, the A type that you're merging into the process step will be unknown. So the overload would have to have like the events queue first.
Yeah.
The overload that takes the events queue probably should have the queue passed before the handlers so that the type of the events gets fixed before you specify handlers. Otherwise, you'll end up with I forget what the type of handlers is, but it'll be like merging user input unknown until you specify. I mean, I guess this is not technically the case with an overload because the first overload would be selected by TypeScript, and then only after you pass events would the second overload be selected. So maybe this is not really that
I
much of a
would
concern.
I would say still that I would keep that anyway because like fixing first the A from the queue, maybe it's better because the XY the XYZ it will attempt to fix the A from the queue at least. What do you think?
Yeah, the other thing you could do is to make it even more flexible. Uh, because right now, like events is just another parameter. We could have like an options argument that takes events as a parameter to keep it like really flexible,
Mm.
right? Like I don't exactly know how that would work. Something to
Yeah, you
think
mean
about
like
though, like
an object in between the initial state and the handlers giving the options?
yeah, I'm not crazy about that because it makes the overloads a little bit
Mm.
harder to detect because like TypeScript will think you're specifying the handlers until you pass the events parameter. Um, this is like a maybe thing.
Mm.
I would definitely do this. Like I would remove receive and merge your events into process. I think this is like a maybe thing. The other thing to consider is one other thing to consider is um, using an options object to pass the external events queue to quote unquote future proof addition of further custom options. Let's just mark these. This is required for me to merge this. This is like a maybe thing. Requires some testing. Oops. And this is a maybe. The last thing I want to do, I'll leave this comment, and then let's just take a look at the implementation. Right now, the before was we take an element from the input queue, and then we process it to get the next action. Let me just unify this and look at the new implementation. So take input. Yeah, I would get rid of all of this. Like, I just get rid of this. Get rid of this. Um, like, I'm not sure how, like, without experimenting with it myself, it's going to be a little harder to like figure this out. But um, I almost want to see if there's a way where you could like remove this discriminated union, but you might
You
not be
could.
able to, right?
Mm.
Because basically on the user end, when you feed the final this result
Process.
thing into process, um, the type here would be like user input or a, and if user input has the same shape as a, they'll overwrite one another. So maybe you do need to have a discriminated union being fed into process.
Mm. At least instead of passing user input or a, you should pass something like user input or event of a, something like that, just to wrap that and make sure that there is no way to overlap them.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the API that process should receive. I just know that I would not have two methods that are doing the same thing.
Mm.
You may need a discriminator for what gets past the process. Um, it would be even more interesting if at the type level you could swap the types of process so that if you specify a queue, the process gets the discriminated
Mm.
union type, right? But if you don't specify a queue, you
You just
just
get the
get
action.
the user input. I think that would be probably the best API that I can think of for now. It's like using conditional logic in your types to swap between a discriminated union or not if the user's passed an event. I like the like idea though. I mean, I like the idea of being able to have a custom events that get merged with um, the existing one. I agree with Mattia. It feels a lot like a stream because with streams you can merge event sources, but like because of the way this is implemented, I think this is fine for now.
Mm. One could maybe, I mean, if you use the queue, probably one could attempt to introduce some kind of determinism by polling the queue for the custom events and choosing if taking from one or the other based on that.
I think if you
But
interrupt the take, the element won't be
yeah, the
dropped. I
element,
think
yeah.
so. I think this is fine because racing the
Oh,
two, if the
oh
take
yeah,
gets
right.
interrupted, the element remains in the queue. So I think this is fine. Um, you could end up in a situation with this implementation where if a user's typing a lot, this doesn't get fired till like the user's done typing. Like you could block this on this, which is maybe what we want. I don't know. I haven't really thought about this problem at all. But yeah, the
I'd say the
biggest thing I'd
probably
like to see is removing this.
I'd say that probably one would prioritize the user events over
Yeah.
maybe the stream events. Not sure. Because at least you get like a nice terminal experience.
All right. Well, that was
Hmm.
an interesting discussion. Anybody else have things they want us to talk about?
Let's check again.
Can you explain what's the difference between this modification or handling it outside the prompt at the agent level? Um, well, so Ariel, I
Mm,
think that this prompt thingy here is not really for agents specifically. This
oh yeah.
prompt is the module from the CLI, not the AI
Mm,
prompt module. So this allows you to build like custom command line application prompts. So for example, like Lloyd, who opened this PR, has this effect boxes library. Is there any like what was the name of the effect stack?
yeah. Yeah.
Stack effect, stack effect.
Okay.
Oh my god. Stack effect. Are there no I thought there was a GIF.
Oh,
There's a
there
GIF.
is a GIF. Yeah, there's a GIF.
So these like prompts here are what we're talking about.
For example, what's our name? Yeah.
Not AI prompts. But just to answer the question in the context of like a CLI prompt, the question that Lloyd had, or the suggestion here, the reason why he wants to be able to feed a custom event source in here is because process will only be called under the hood on user input events, and it does require um, basically like what Lloyd did here, which is hacking around uh, like the terminal interface to be able to join the queues together. Whereas if we have a design that allows you to pass an external event queue in, you could theoretically merge input events and other events coming in to this render loop for that CLI prompt.
Maybe another approach could be, instead one could change the return
Oh, here's some
of the
examples.
maybe I'd say something that does not make sense, but probably another way to get the same behavior could be to change the return type of the process from being a signature that returns an effect to maybe a signature that returns a stream, and then in the stream you can return either nothing, and that means that you just recall again process without changing the state, or you return this new state, and then basically that will again re-invoke on next render the same state.
Could be. I think the goal I had in mind when I first designed this was to just be a very simple state
Yeah,
machine.
yeah, yeah.
But anyway, Lloyd, let us know when you've had a chance to look into this stuff. I think there's some interesting things you can do at the type level with the signature. And if we do that, we should add type tests for this as well.
Yeah.
because now we're trying to be better about anytime we add stuff to modules that is like relies on TypeScript logic to do something right. We're trying to be better about introducing, where is it? Packages, effect, type test. We're trying to be better about introducing type tests.